My name is Joan Elliott. I'm a member of Ladies Golf Club of Toronto, as most probably are you. Before me, my mother was a member. She was a member who joined in 1981, having heard what a great course it was. She had been a member at the Board of Trade along with a bunch of other women who decided to come to Ladies and give it a try. Well, it was a very successful try. That was 1981 when she came. I joined in 1987, having gone with my mother on a couple of occasions. Most particularly one that I remember. She brought me in as a guest to Lady. I had never played before. And on the fifth hole, which was our favorite hole, I'd have to say, she told me at one point, well, you can pick up your ball, dear, because, we'll just move on. That was actually my 13th stroke. So I learned early that you have to move on because I was holding up the people behind. So we got going. At any rate, it was a great opportunity. I decided, well, I guess we both decided I was going to join. She paid my membership, so that made it easy. And then I joined. I've had a great experience at Ladies. It's a wonderful club, been involved in all kinds of stuff, in committees. I've served on the board. I've served in many capacities, and I have enjoyed my time. I must say I'm enjoying the fact that my daughter, my mother's granddaughter, is now a member of the club. Some of you may know Maya Huck. My mother was Annette Elliott, I'm Joan Elliott, and my daughter is Maya Huck. So we are all members, proud members of Ladies. At any rate, I want to tell you today a story about Ada Mackenzie, a woman of influence. She was a visionary, an athlete, a mentor, an entrepreneur. She was all of these things, and it was because of her that we now can enjoy our great club. Ada was born in Toronto in October of 1891, that is, you have to add that now, into an affluent golfing family. They belonged at first to Highland Golf Club and then eventually to Mississauga Club. They were an affluent family. They had tennis courts and a stable on the property, so no food stamps there. Ada attended Havergal College. She was a model student, and in particular, she was a model athlete. She won the championship for the school 3 years in a row. And she played her first match of golf when she was 13 years of age. Her mother was in a foursome and unfortunately couldn't play, so Ada stood in for her. That was her first match. And she won her first amateur ladies championship in 1911. There she is. You can see those bright eyes, a lady with determination. I think her chin shows some determination there. She's a young woman of promise, moving forward. Here we are with our founder. This is Ada Mackenzie in about 1919. She's standing outside the Mississauga Golf and Country Club where her parents were members. She had her first major Canadian win here, the Canadian Open Amateur in 1919. Now, just to set the whole thing in context, to know how it's so significant that Ada Mackenzie was able to get this whole thing going. Before she was born, British Lord Wellworth, and I'm going to quote here, in 1890, in his book called Golf, declared, "If women chose to play at times when male golfers are feeding or resting, no one can object. But at other times, must we say it, they're in the way." In 1918, women had just gained the vote. Some provinces had not. Quebec had not. In 1929, fewer than 4% of Canadian women worked outside the home. Most of them were married. Those who weren't married obviously worked outside the home to support themselves. Ada continued after Havergal to work at Havergal, and then she went in 1914 to the Bank of Commerce. She worked in the loans department, which gave her some good experience for later years at Ladies. At this time, lady athletes, women athletes were few and far between, and this is where Ada Mackenzie was looked on as a pioneer. Her achievements were even more remarkable when it was really considered the outside the home was the man's world, inside rather was the ladies' world. To quote Ada, she never had time for marriage. She was supposed to have been married. I mean, that was the normal path, but she didn't. She didn't have time for marriage. She had a vision, and her vision involved golf and the club that we can now enjoy. They had strict restrictions, Ladies did, at other courses. At a course where your husband was a member, should he die, you were no longer a member. Women had strict restrictions in terms of time and all kinds of other things. Now, to try to get around that, Ada decided it was time to form a club where women had the best possible position. And I'm going to quote here. Ada said in 1924, "The idea of forming such a club originated some years ago when I was in England." This was the British Open in 1920. Realizing the opportunities that were open to English girls to enjoy the game and learn it from childhood up, it occurred to me that such a club as we now have formed would give our girls a better chance. Restrictions as to days and hours creep into the rules as soon as the club becomes popular, and with the high fees added to the shortness of our season, it's little wonder that we find it difficult to hold our own. The business girl, teacher, or parent can, at their leisure, make use of our club and spend delightful weekends when desires. You may or may not know it. There used to be a couple of bedrooms upstairs, and I think it was $2 a night that you could stay there. I have a delightful thing for you to listen to. I've heard it before, some of you may have, but every time I hear it, I enjoy it. This is an interview in 1949, in the year of the 25th anniversary, with Ada Mackenzie, as done by Bob Keston, CBC reporter.
In the sports world, golf has the feature spot today, with the Canadian Open getting underway at St. George's Golf Club in suburban Toronto. Tonight, we're going to tell you about another golf club in Toronto, the only one of its kind in the world. Bob Keston interviews Miss Ada Mackenzie, founder of the Toronto Ladies Golf and Tennis Club.
Miss Mackenzie, in what way is this golf club unique?
Well, it's strictly for women.
I understand the Toronto Ladies Golf and Tennis Club was pretty well your idea in the first place. Well, what prompted it?
My having to go into business during the First World War and finding not sufficient time to play at the other courses with restrictions.
Well, what about the men, Miss Mackenzie? Do they play at your course?
Yes, they do, as guests.
And how do they react to the setup there?
I think they all like it. In fact, I don't think they want too many men knowing about it, so they have it all to themselves on a Sunday morning.
They're allowed to come in with more regularity than women are allowed to go to the other courses, is that right?
There are no restrictions for times.
How successful a club is it? For example, what's your membership?
Around 400.
And what about the financial side, Miss Mackenzie? Is the Toronto Ladies Golf and Tennis Club successful there too?
Yes, we've always managed to keep our head above water. And a few difficulties, but we've overcome them.
Well, what about such things as levies and special assessments?
No real assessments at all. It's all a voluntary contribution.
Well, how does your course compare to others for play, I mean?
Well, you mean the course is built a little differently.
Is it?
Yes, they make it a little harder at the 200-yard mark. Narrows up instead of getting wider.
I see. Most courses get wider after the 200 mark.
Yes.
And yours narrows down.
That's right.
Well, what is the reaction to that?
Well, it's the men don't like it.
No, they don't.
No, they're used to getting 250, and that puts them in trouble.
I see. This course, in other words, actually makes them what? Play
They've got to be more accurate. It's a long shot.
Well, now, the pro at your club, every golf club has a pro. Is it a man or a woman?
Oh, it's a man.
And he get along all right with the ladies?
Oh, yes, famously.
I understand that your club has done and is doing a great deal to encourage an interest in golf in the younger players.
Yes, we want the younger players to come on as fast as we can to represent us in Great Britain or the United States.
You took part in several of those tournaments yourself, didn't you?
Yes, and I would have liked a lot of support from our own Canadians.
I see. Thank you very much, Miss Ada Mackenzie. This is Bob Keston reporting from Toronto.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I get a thrill out of it every time I hear it. The voice is just terrific. At any rate, she couldn't have done all of this without Stanley Thompson. Stanley Thompson, noted Canadian golf architect, was also known as the Toronto Terror because of his love of things alcoholic, apparently. At any rate, Ada hired her friend, Stanley Thompson, and together they looked for the ideal, the perfect piece of land to build this golf course. Obviously, you're not building in downtown, so they were looking up in Thornhill area. Don't forget, Stanley Thompson had just built the club across the street. It's just a couple of years older than ours, the Thornhill Club. So he was familiar with the area, and it lent itself so well to the building of a golf course, the hills, the ravines, the valleys. Stanley Thompson summarizes his design philosophy, and I will quote, by saying, "The most successful course is one where you test the skill of the most advanced golfer without discouraging the duffer, while adding to the enjoyment of both." So they looked and they found this perfect piece of property, which, as Ada said, wasn't really for sale, but she talked the man into it. With Ada's influence and using the natural features they built on the 130-acre property, he would design a course that would suit women and challenge men. Now, as was mentioned, the course is unique. It's a little shorter. Most of the women play from the yellow tees. There are those who play from the black back tees, the blue tees, not the men's tees. It's a little shorter, as was mentioned by Ada. It narrows up at 200 yards. The greens are small and challenging. One in particular is really challenging, number 7. Oh my God. If you're not in good shape, you could be in big trouble. There are par 3s, 6 of them. They have elevated tee-off areas, and you can choose to not go for it if you wish. Most of the men go for it, or they seem to think maybe it's considered unmanly to not. I mean, you can opt to play short as anybody, a woman or man golfer, and then go for it on the second one and hopefully hold your ball out. As I mentioned, there are elevated tees, bunkers on the sides, not in the middle. Now, financing this thing, they found the perfect piece of land. Now they have to finance it and they have to get it. So here we have a picture that is taken of our clubhouse in around 1926. This, of course, is after the purchase because it was purchased in 24 and was operational in 26. So it really hasn't changed a great deal since that. Of course, the bridge there at the front of the picture is very different to the bridge that exists now. That wouldn't make it with the great big trucks going back and forth. So Ada now was looking to get a property. She had her friend, Stanley Thompson, help her find it. But without a husband, a single woman had virtually no opportunity to get a mortgage. Ada and Thompson posed as husband and wife. I've heard this in several different sources when they set out looking for a club site because she feared, I'm quoting, she feared possible rejection and or escalation of price if an owner knew the real purpose of their inquiries. She even said, Ada did, if I said I was looking for a ladies golf course site, I might still be looking. Here's a couple of good quotes in here, so I'm going to quote them literally. One well-known newspaper publisher of the time, Dick Southam, subscribed and purchased some bonds, but told her, and he's very insulting here, you haven't a snowball's chance. There never were that many women in the world who could work together. Terrible. According to Ada, Watson did not want to sell, really, but his young wife, Margaret, found that it was too far for her. She was a young socialite. They were newly married. He worked at King Street, so it wasn't exactly an ideal location to be going around and doing all the social things. And Ada said, actually, the land wasn't for sale. I just persuaded Mr. Watson he wanted to sell. I had some help because his wife wasn't interested in the country. So Ada signed an option to purchase. It was drawn by the owner, Strafford Watson, whose father lived next door. It was drawn in August of 24. Price, $85,000 for this 130-acre plot. Down payment of $40,000. $40,000 was due just a few months later in November of 24. So Ada took it upon herself. Don't forget, she worked at CIBC, so she had some awareness of how money worked and how to get it. She pitched the sale of bonds. She needed to get this down payment, so she went to prominent women who were by and large the wives of prominent men. She went to Lady Edith Bailey, who later became the president, Lady Eaton, Sir John Craig's wife, Adelaide McLaughlin of Buick fame, Jessie Dunlop. Jessie Dunlop lived with her husband, David, and they had the Donalda property down. It was a farm, which later became Donalda Golf Course. Ada also went, and wisely so, to wealthy men, because the wives and daughters, as she pointed out to them, wouldn't jam their course if they had their own course. So Watson, the owner of the property, he was wanting to get the thing struck down. He wasn't happy that they were going to be losing the property. Apparently that summer, the Duke of Kent and the Prince of Wales came with the Governor General, big crowd, over to the property that became Ladies, over to Strafford Watson's. They had just been at the Thornhill Club, and they were very complimentary about the property that the Watsons owned and wondered why they would sell it. Well, they really then determined that they didn't want to sell it. They would have liked to dump out of it, but the only way it could be dumped out of it was if Ada couldn't bring the money. So the money was due in November. If she couldn't get it, then the deal would have fallen through. So she was a little short on the day that it was due. Not that anybody deliberately held back, but there was some money that hadn't come in yet. So what she did, she went to J.P. Bickle. Some of you may know of him. He was the startup of the Maple Leafs, and he also he was a philanthropist who was very involved with the establishment of Sick Kids. So she went to see him, and she actually was on his front porch because he wouldn't let her in. He was a bit of a misogynist. He would not let her in, but she was very convincing and talked him into buying the $8,000 bond. She then went down to the bank with the money in hand, and it was our club. Now, it wouldn't have been our club had it not been for somebody like J.P. Bickle, a man who came to the rescue at the end. I mean, lots and lots of effort by Ada and all the women, but when it failed right at the end, somebody hadn't handed in the bond money they had promised. She had to get the money from Bickle, and he was wise enough and kind enough, maybe not kind enough, wise enough to buy the bond. He was convinced that it was a good deal. And it was called at the time Ladies Golf and Tennis Club of Toronto. It was granted on November the 13th, 1924. Now, back in the earlier days, I know I had one, and I'm sure you did too, Mary and Doris. This is a share certificate. This particular share certificate for $100, I had to pay $100, was signed by Ada Mackenzie, shown to be secretary, and by Edith Bailey. It is a share certificate for $100, and this one went to a lady named McConkey. When the golf course was started, now this obviously wasn't Hazel Hudson at the start. This is Hazel Hudson later on. Hazel Hudson was just a young woman. She had finished school, and she was quite interested in what Ada was proposing, a woman who was proposing a course for and by women. And she had some talent. So Hazel joined the club. She scooped out the money from her bank account and joined the club. And then she continued to work hard with Ada. Ada was mentoring her. And she actually won the club championship, I think it was 8 times or something of that order. And I saw her, and some of you may have too, if you have been around for some time. She was on a Canada Day thing. She was in a putting contest on the 18th hole. So that was precious to see. So we're ready to roll, and we had to get a new board of directors. This, of course, is the picture that is in the founders room, and these are the founders. Now, I love showing this picture to guests that I might bring to the club. The first thing I notice, and most people do, is the hats and the fashion. Most of these pictures, all but of Ada in the center and of Jessie Dunlop on the bottom, were done in the early period in the 20s. Look at those hats. Wow. Now, another thing I would like you to look at is Ada Mackenzie is shown as the founder, Miss Ada Mackenzie. The lady to her right is Lady Bailey, president. Now, look at the other names. Mrs. Arthur Niles, Mrs., well, you can't tell on that one, Mrs. Harry Cockshott. They had the identities of their husbands. Women were not quite visible. They were dependent upon their husbands for their identity. So at that time, the first annual meeting, now that this board of directors has been founded, the first annual meeting was held February 13th, 1925 at the home of the first president, Lady Bailey. The report was presented by Miss Ada Mackenzie, managing secretary, and it showed this is a quote, a highly gratifying condition of affairs. Only 15 of the original memberships, that's the $100 memberships, were left of the 300. And they decided at that point, probably a good idea to go to 400. So, as I said, Lady Edith Bailey, she was the president, and Mrs. Dunlop was vice president. Now, I mean, some of us have been president or vice president. Just imagine what they had to well, I don't know, they look forward to it. They wouldn't have known it at the time. They served from 1924 to 1942. Can you imagine that role for all those years? And Ada Mackenzie, all during that time, was secretary. They had a powerful board. These are not the business women who came along later. These are the elite. These are the founders, the ones with the wealthy husbands. And it was not until 1943 that they stepped back and they became honorary president and vice president. That is Lady Bailey and Mrs. Dunlop, and Ada stepped up. So Ada became the president in 1943 and 44 during the war. And I'll speak more of the war years later. That was about the time in 1945 when they changed things around and did the present system of the 3-year term and the rotation, so that you've always got people on there who know what they're doing. This is also in the founders room. This is the notice that was sent to the members with the startup. A couple of interesting things on here. The phone number was phone Thornhill, just 60. No 9 digits there, or 10 digits, or 12, or however many, just 2. The notice to members said 9 holes are now in play, that lessons could be booked with the professional, D.A. Ferguson, who was of course a man. Meals were being served at all times without notice. The tennis courts are ready for use, and the radial from North Yonge Street goes to stop 16 every 20 minutes. Now, the tennis courts, I'll just mention this before I forget. You can see exactly where they were right now. They've been doing some stuff in the area as the driveway turns around to make its last turn to go in by the clubhouse there. The area on the right, they've been clearing out some wood from there, and that's where the tennis courts were. There were 2 of them. So the 2 tennis courts were in play until the 50s, and in the 50s, they were no longer, I guess, used as much. They probably didn't have the money to make it work. So this is the notice sent out, and then there was an official opening. This official opening was in 1926. This is for 18 holes, not just 9. This is the 18-hole opening, and it happened in August 23rd, on August 23rd, 26. There was a match. Ada loved matches. She really didn't like medal play as much. She really enjoyed a match. So she played in the match. She was the Open champion of Canada at that point, and Helen Paget from Ottawa was the present Canadian closed champion. Now, Open and closed, there were the 2 kinds of championships that were going at that time. The close was closed to anybody who wasn't Canadian. In other words, the Canadian one was open to everybody to come into it. So this is the replica of the thing they played in. They played a long course. Look at that. They played over 6,000 yards, and they must have played well. And guess what? In this match, Ada was successful. Ada won it, 4-3, meaning 4 up and 3 to go. There were over 1,000 people in attendance. Another note from Hazel Hudson, she was involved in helping with the entertainment. There were 1,000 people there. They were making sandwiches and tea, coffee, and other little things. They ran out of sandwiches because they didn't expect nearly that number of people, and they had to go to the local churches and a couple of local stores. In the end, all they had to offer was bread and butter, but it was a celebration. So it also noted, and I just quote here, there was an annual fee at this point. You paid your $100, and then there's an annual fee of $35. Can you imagine? An annual fee of $35 and 50 cents a round if you wanted to bring a guest. The club was operating with just enough money, as Ada said, to keep our heads above water. There were not enough resources to advertise, so Ada prevailed upon everybody and herself to get people who would be interested in to come into the club. So I've spoken about Ada in terms of the growth and the startup of the club. Now I want to address the idea of her as an athlete, because she certainly was that. She was the First Lady of Canadian Golf. She was inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in 1955. She was nicknamed the First Lady of Canadian Golf, as I said, but also widely referred to as the Queen of Canadian Amateurs, or Captain Ada. She won, now remember the Canadian Open and Closed, those are the 2 major Canadian championships. The Open perhaps more prestigious because it welcomed in people from other countries. At any rate, she won that 5 times. The Canadian Closed, she also won 5 times. So in 1933, Ada was phenomenally successful. She claimed wins in every tournament across the country. She was named the Female Athlete of the Year by the Canadian Press in 1933. She was 42 years old. And as it said here, in 1955, she was inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. She also was a player as she moved on in age. She was a senior player. She won 9 Canadian Senior Women's Championships and won them right up to age 78 in 1969. Quite a golfer, our Ada. She won the Ladies Ontario Amateur Champion too. She was 9 times that. So in the earlier days, it was very hard because, as I was saying earlier, it was difficult for women to get time to practice. Now that she had her own course, she could practice, and she obviously made use of it, and she competed very well. When she said, I started golfing when women were supposed to know more about a cook stove than a niblick. Niblick, of course, is a little club that she used rather extensively. So, and as I said, Ada was inducted into the Canadian Hall of Fame in 1971 and into the Ontario Golf Hall of Fame in 2000. I was the president of the club in 1999, our 75th anniversary year. It was quite an honor to be able to hold that position. And then in the following year, in 2000, because the president in 2000 couldn't go, I went in her place to see the ceremony that inducted Ada into the Golf Hall of Fame. It was Ontario Golf Hall of Fame. It was really something. Ada competed internationally as well. She loved to compete in Bermuda, US, and in Britain. And here she's shown in 1932. She competed in Cherry Valley in the States, in Pennsylvania. In 1927, she was a medalist and semifinal position. She continued to golf and continued and continued. As a senior golfer, this is taken shortly before she died in January of 73 when she was 81 years old. She was the great lady of Canadian golf. Her last win, as I said, was in 1969, which isn't that far before, when she was 78. Now, Ada, as well as being a visionary and the builder of the course and athlete, was a mentor. Here you can see a picture of the Canadian ladies team. There are 4 apparently from ladies. They went to UK in 1953, and Ada's sitting there in the center. And on the right-hand side, on the lower bench, is Marlene Streit. So she was quite a young lady there, and she was mentored by Ada. Now here's another picture of Marlene Streit. And Ada, as I said, is a mentor to Marlene Streit. She won that British Open Championship in 1953. She was also mentor to young Sandra Post. And as you know, of course, Sandra Post is a considerable professional of note. Now, not only was she an athlete, not only was she a mentor, she was also an entrepreneur. Here we have in a shop that Ada established, Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra at Ada Sports and Clothes Shop. It was the Ada Mackenzie Ltd in Yorkville. She also had one up in Port Carling. Now, one of the reasons she apparently developed this entrepreneurship and the store was that in her younger years, she became quite fascinated with leather as a fabric or as something to make things from. She actually studied leather making in Wales, and she started up a business in her own house doing just that. She got caught short one time because, well, remember the kinds of clothes they wore, those very long things, and many of them were made of wool. She was playing in match one time, and it started to rain like crazy. So her wool outfit started to get longer and longer. And her sleeves went down over, and she was having trouble keeping them off her hands. Her skirt went longer and longer, and apparently she'd forgotten to wear her proper shoes, so she lost the match. So she wasn't going to let that happen anymore, and she established this shop so that others would have wonderful things to be able to buy. Her biggest entrepreneurship really is the course. It was established in 1924. These are the signs, 2 of the signs that have been at the club at front entrance. At one time, we used to hide. It wasn't considered necessary to show where we were. The sign on the left here is the sign that was the sort of symbol, rather, that was designed in a contest. Nora Stott's nephew designed that, and it was selected as the winner. So that's the traditional one there, the one with the red jacket and the blue skirt. Then in more recent years, we went, I call her the little girl. It's not very complimentary, but it's the more modern one. That was put up. Both of these signs were donated by a friend of mine, Gloria Croton, who was president a couple of years before me. She was president, and then Margaret Auld, and then me. So these signs were both donated by Gloria Croton. As I said, this golf club is all about connections. I met Gloria Croton in 1990 when she joined the club. Great gal, not really a wonderful golfer, but a lovely person. Very, very keen. She was involved with me when we established the Ada Mackenzie Heritage Foundation, and she was very generous and donated these things. Now, you build a club, it doesn't come without problems. There were all kinds of things to deal with. Now, looking at this picture, This shows a heritage, our heritage property attacked by natural elements. But even before that, there were problems and challenges. The first problem for Ada was the depression starting in 29. Not much money. Golf was considered frivolous. So the course sort of went downhill. Membership went downhill. It wasn't very nice during that period of time. Then the war came along just after the depression. And the war created even more problems. I mean, we almost didn't survive that. During the time of the war, the pro left. The pro left in 1941. He was not replaced. There wasn't enough money to pay a pro. In 1942, there were only 292 members. Now that's just under 300, which they had at the start. But remember, they were targeting 400. The fees were dropped, and the business women came in, so that started to bring money in, and they were not above and beyond doing all kinds of sales and rummage sales and teas and all kinds of things to raise money. In 1942, various members were kind enough to volunteer, and they paid off a loan, the idea being they would get the money back. And sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. In 1944, after having had 192 members in 1944, Ada, at the last event, at the closing tea, and we've all been to those, Ada determined that the club would not be able to open again. She actually announced that, and it created quite a horror, as I'm sure you can imagine. But apparently there were some of the women had heard about that, and they banded together, these women. They were business women, and they determined that they were going to salvage the club. So they worked very hard. They did everything they could to try to salvage the club. And they did. So it went beyond the war. The 50s were pretty good. 60s and so on, went on and on. Acts of God in the 50s, Hurricane Hazel, 1954. Thankfully, somebody had the foresight to put, those sort of cement sandbags or whatever one would call them at the base of 18, just before the river. Those had been put in just before Hurricane Hazel and saved that hill from being eroded. This is a picture that I took from my balcony in 2005. This was an interesting time. I had just had a birthday party because I have a birthday the next day, and my friend who was born on the 19th was there for the weekend. At any rate, I saw this happening, and I was just so shocked. In 1 hour, we had 7 inches of rain. I looked out on Yonge Street, and there was actually a fountain coming up out of one of the sewers because the structure couldn't hold all the water. The river couldn't hold all the water. So look at this. You can see the sand just about all out of the bunkers. The river has gone higher, and it actually was over the road. It was higher than that at one point, but I took this a little later. A little earlier, I couldn't see it. Look at the bridge. The bridge here. That bridge became disconnected from the other side. I was watching it, and I was on the phone with the pro shop because we were going to be having an event. And I was talking to Lori Ribsky, and I said, "Oh my God, there goes the bridge." And she yelled, Mary Jane, the bridge is going," because they thought I meant the concrete bridge. But no, that bridge didn't go. This bridge did. This was in 2005. Another one went in, and I saw another one go in another couple of years. So we eventually put the money in using the last of the endowment fund money and put that big bridge that went in, the one with the steel girders, and it's not going anywhere. So at any rate, quite an event that happened. Now, we have survived all of these things by our hard work and determination. And you've seen this picture in the clubhouse. I took this one too. Look at down here. There were rapids on the 17th. This was a lake. I actually saw a heron who was fishing. The area of the marsh is pretty well all filled in with water. Look, the sand has all gone under the traps. There's still some water there. So we survived the deluge. We survived all the threats to our existence. And on this one, we really did well because there was a planned wedding reception. So the general manager, James Pearson, and probably a couple of others went down because the road was covered with water. Nobody knew where the road was. Well, not nobody. Certainly the people who were the guests wouldn't have known where it was. So James Pearson and others led them, I don't know whether it was in golf carts or in their cars, Anyway, they led these people up past the problem and then up and around into the clubhouse. Now, there was no power. The power went out, and they were able to have a barbecue. They were able to have the wine that had been cooled before. They were able to have a nice evening with candles. It was a beautiful evening. We survived the deluge, as we always have. Now, interestingly, at that time in 2005, we were supposed to be having an invitational event or a charity event, I forget which, but I know I was involved with it. So we decided that we couldn't do that, because how are you going to play golf after that? And we also decided this was the point at which we were going to be doing that big renovation to the course, where we're going to actually put water in, not like the water on 17, but we were going to have to dig channels to put ponds in to be able to provide the water necessary for an irrigation system. Now, that all came about because we had a pump that failed, a pump that took water out of the Don River. It took the water out of the Don River. Sorry, you can't do irrigation anymore. You need to have a permit. They allowed us to do it for a period of time, as long as we could demonstrate that we were going to do a big fix. Well, the big fix was planned. I know I was at the club, of course, during all those presentations, quite fascinating to watch. The plan was that we were going to do the big fix. The big fix was planned to cost, I think it was $4.3 million. $4.3 million. That's a lot of money. They had to fix the course such that they could store water, because you can't pump water from the Don, at least according to the new regs, unless the Don River is in flood. Then you can pump it out. But if you're going to pump it out, then who needs it? You need to be able to store the water. So that's what they did. At any rate, we survived the deluge. We survived all of those things. Ada's vision survives, and has survived because of a lot of hard work. So I've tried to tell you a little of the history, and I have another really good quote. I just found this one. So I want to let you know what this one is. This one was a quote by Tats Ball. Tats Ball, or Catherine Ball, was the president of the club in 1949. In 1974. In 1974, 50th anniversary, she was the president at that time. She'd been a member for 40 years. She thought maybe somebody else should do this tribute and celebration. So what she said was, I was asked to speak about the club. I realized it was really a story of people. These people were mostly women, although we've had good advice from several men, professionals, and groundskeepers. I'm not a women's liver, but I am proud to know that it was the vision, courage, reputation, and ability of one woman that was responsible for the founding of the club, that it was the wisdom and dedication of successive boards and committees of women which had led the club to its present state of beauty and prosperity. And then at the end of it, she wished them all success for the next 50 years. That was in 1974. Well, here we are. We're just a few years away from our 100th anniversary. We are going to continue to celebrate our inheritance by playing, learning, and enjoying our wonderful club in its simplest forms, a place for women to play golf and enjoy one another and all the good friends they make. Thank you.